Idyllic Singapore, known for its spotless streets, vibrant economy, and multiculturalism. But this seemingly peaceful society is not without controversy. The political system in the city-state is the focus of a heated public debate.
Stand before you as the first female president of Singapore.
This is Halimah Yacob, Singapore's new president. She rose to power without an election because there were no other eligible candidates. The vote, originally set for the end of next week, has been cancelled. All other potential candidates were disqualified because they didn't meet new election rules passed by Parliament earlier this year. Most controversial among them, a rule requiring candidates to be ethnically Malay. Critics say Yacob's former party, the People's Action Party, has intentionally manipulated the election rules to prevent competition to get their candidate into office. The PAP has ruled Singapore since independence from Malaysia in 1965. So people here are used to having predictable polls, but this latest election, or lack thereof, is being seen by many as a step too far. Singapore prides itself on being a multicultural meritocracy. Successive Singaporean governments have used merit as a tool in the careful maintenance of racial harmony. The decision to reserve the presidential post for an ethnic Malay this election has come as a surprise to many. The Chinese, followed by the predominantly Muslim Malays, make up the two largest ethnic groups in Singapore. But Malays are underrepresented in government, and officials say this election was meant to help change that. Instead, growing criticism of the way this election was managed means what should have been a celebration of diversity in the coming to power of Halimah Yacob has been overshadowed by doubt over the authenticity of Singaporean democracy and fear for the future of the very system that has guided and uplifted the city-state since independence. Basil Rehan, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Singapore is James Dorsey. He's a senior fellow in the School of International Studies at Nanyang Technological University. Also in Singapore, Chong Jia Ian. He's an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at the National University of Singapore. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Let me start with you, Chong. Halimah Yacob, former Speaker of Parliament. She's a woman. She's the first woman to be president. Is it something to celebrate?
It could have been something to celebrate, but I think, unfortunately, in the eyes of many people in Singapore, the process has tainted what could have been a celebration with the impression, right? The impression that things have been set up such that she would win, not fair and square, that she wasn't able to really allow Singaporeans to demonstrate how they would actually support a woman, support a Muslim, a Malay minority, because there was, as you stated, there's no election, and so it was not possible for her to demonstrate the support that she might have gotten from the population.
Yeah. So let me see if I understand you clearly. You feel as if the government couldn't trust the people with the vote. They wanted a woman, they wanted her, they wanted, I guess, the second Malay Muslim president. They felt that was the ideal candidate. They didn't trust that the people would choose her?
Well, that is the impression. That's the impression that many people have. And that certainly, if you look online or you talk to people on the streets, opinion is very divided over President Halimah Yacob. So many people do reflect those sentiments that you say. Many people do feel that it's very unfortunate that the current administration does not trust the Singapore population to elect someone like Halimah Yacob.
Okay, James Dorsey, was it a mistake that this was a selection and not an election?
To be frank, I don't quite understand why they handled it this way. With other words, the PAP is the dominant party in the country. The likelihood that their candidate would not have been popularly elected is very low. The debate, as Chung was pointing out, in Singapore is not about the quality of the candidate, or so much even the fact that she is from the minority. It is about the process. And I don't think that the government would have run a major risk if it would have had a much more open process in the election of the president.
Chong, is there a feeling then that this was, and again, I don't want to trivialize her achievements and her history. She's got a fantastic CV. But for those who felt they didn't have a choice, do they feel as if in a country that prides itself on being a meritocracy, this was an enforced quota upon them?
Right, so there is that impression. There's the impression that this is tokenism, that, given Halimah Yacob's experience, she should have won handily. She should be a demonstration of meritocracy. Instead, there's this stage-managed process in the view of many people, such that Singapore's touting of meritocracy seems to ring hollow in this case. So I think it's become a bit of surprise and a disappointment to many Singaporeans. So obviously there are people who do support Halimah regardless, but it's become, I think, unnecessarily contentious, this whole process, the way that the current administration has handled things.
Yeah, James, looking at the eligibility rules, there's the stipulation that a candidate from the private sector should have headed a company with paid-up capital of at least $500 million. Now, there's one way to read it, okay, high standards. There's another way to read it, well, that's somewhat rigged in a way because it excludes so many people, and perhaps the only people you have in mind are those who have that history. Are the eligibility rules unnecessarily harsh or maybe even rigged?
Well, I don't think they were rigged. I think there's an argument to be made that they may have been very strict. But I think that there are two issues that are playing a role here. One is meritocracy, but the other thing is the Singapore trauma, if you wish, and that is the trauma of race relations. In fact, if you look at this, and that's the opportunity, in a sense, that the government, by doing it the way it has somewhat undermined. Singapore is making a statement by having a woman, having a Muslim woman, having a Muslim woman who is religious at this point in history as its president, and that's quite a statement. The issue of the quota system is really built into Singapore society. Just look at the way public housing is structured, where you have quotas to ensure that no single housing block is an ethnically or religiously homogeneous unit. So that quota system really is part of the way Singapore was built.
Chong, she's in the position, she's not going to go anywhere. I mean, there isn't a dispute right now, right? We're not going to see her replaced in any way. She's going to be the next president. She is the next president. Now, talking about bridging that racial divide or Singapore's trauma, as James had mentioned, given that she's a practicing Malay Muslim, many Malay Muslims have felt at times dominated by the majority over the years, and they felt, they haven't had an equal opportunity in this meritocracy. Will she be able to give them confidence? Will she be able to bridge that divide between the Chinese and the Malay?
Well, I think Halimah Yacob would have to work extra hard. It would have been easier if she were elected, because I think for many people who are concerned about her coming to office, and this includes many Malay Muslims, they feel that for so long a lot of the quota system puts Malays in a position where they feel it's tokenism, that they get allowed quota, that they are things are made easy for them, that they are not competing on their own merits, and they want to show that they are as good as any other Singaporean, that they do live up to the words of the pledge that Singapore is supposed to carry on regardless of race, language, or religion. Now, the feeling then with this process, having Halimah Yacob being put into the office of the presidency, is that, well, it's another example of tokenism, that she hasn't really shown how she can actually fare very well next to anybody else. Because this whole idea of race relations, I think it is a baggage that Singapore has, but there is also talk now about whether and how Singapore can move beyond it. Because if you look at the population, demographics are changing. There is intermarriage. There is immigration that's changing some of the original ethnic makeup. So I think this interjection into the process may actually set things back in the minds of many minority members of society.
Yeah, Chong, and it's very difficult for me to gauge how much social media chatter represents a kind of mainstream discourse. But I was having a look on social media and following some of the hashtags and some of the trends, and there seems to be a kind of sub-debate as well, because some from among the ethnic Malays are saying, well, she doesn't really represent us because she's half Indian. And there's a whole other thing going on there as well. Tell me what's going on there.
So with the reserve election, several things are going on. One is that it has to be reserved for a Malay minority. However, like any ethnic entity or any ethnic group, there's a lot of fluidity. It's porous. So what happened is that Halimah is part Indian, and the committee has recognized her as Malay, saying that the community recognizes her as Malay, which is, I suppose, well and good for the committee. But the problem then remains, if you are holding up a reserve election for Malays, the question is, what is Malay? Who is Malay? How do we determine what is the process? What is a legitimate process? So it raises up many uncomfortable questions. And of course, the other part about the reserved election, about the presidential election in general, that James had mentioned earlier, is that there's a eligibility criteria of 500 million, but that's for private sector people. For people who come up from the public sector, right? They have to serve in ministerial posts, or in this case, a Speaker of Parliament post. So the view then is, well, okay, it seems that everything is being twisted and turned just to allow Halimah Yacob to come up to the presidency. This is what I'm reflecting the sentiments that I hear, right? Such that what a reserve election for Malays really rings hollow, and it seems for many like underplaying what Malays can really achieve in society. This is a reflection of some of those sentiments that I hear.
Right. Yeah, James, are you going to have Malays saying, hey, if I win, if I'm going to be president, I want to have won the election. I don't want to be put there just because I'm Malay, because the ruling party wants a Malay at the head of the table right now.
Well, I think you'll hear some of that, but I think that Chong makes a very good point with tokenism. I also think that there's another issue, and that is that this is, from Singapore's point of view, a period in history which is very sensitive because of the rise of militant or more militant forms of Islam. And so they are very concerned about external forces disrupting the internal racial or ethnic and religious harmony. And I think there was a professor today who launched a book on the non-liberal character of Singapore, in which he said one of the problems of this government is that it is over-managing race or ethnic relations. And that's maybe what you've been seeing here with the election of Halimah.
So what you're saying is, in terms of how they want to manage, I guess, a vibrant, pluralistic society, they want to have harmony in the society and enforce it by having a female Muslim president at a time when they fear Islamic extremism. I'm not sure if I fully understand you, but is that what you're trying to say is going on in the minds of the government right now?
Well, let me. What I'm trying to say is that one of the primary goals of the government is to ensure harmony between religious and ethnic groups. This is a period of time in which there is rising sectarianism in countries around Singapore. You have the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar. You've had the rise of the Islamic State in the Philippines. And by having a Muslim president, on top of that a Muslim woman, Singapore is making a statement.
Right.
It's making a statement both towards Singaporeans as well as towards the outside world. And I think that, without wanting to put words in Chong's mouth, but what Chong is saying, and I would agree with, is there would have been a way of doing this that actually would have reinforced that message.
Okay, so Chong, is that true? Is Singapore trying to say we don't have a Muslim problem?
I think to some degree that is true. They are trying to send a signal that there is no Muslim problem. However, I think part of the discomfort also with Halimah's placement into the presidency is that there are other issues that pertain to race relations that are not adequately resolved. So, for example, employment discrimination against Malays, against Muslims, sometimes happens. You see, when it comes to housing, especially housing advertisements, sometimes they can quite openly say we don't want a tenant of such and such a race or such and such a religion. And these things, I think, are far more deleterious to race relations than whether you have a symbol on top or not. And I think the effort to put someone like Halimah in the presidency is to try to say, is to send a signal. But I think at some point, a signal can only go so far.
Yeah, Chong Jia Ian and James Dorsey, it's been good to talk to both of you. Thank you very much for joining us.